Every home carries a silent story. Some homes quietly drain luck, wealth, and opportunities without anyone realizing. Others, sometimes without any obvious reason, seem to naturally pull success, financial growth, and lucky breaks closer year after year. What creates this difference? It's not just about hard work. It's not about expensive renovations. Often it comes down to the simple, deliberate placement of objects that activate the right kind of energy. And today, I'm going to reveal one of the most overlooked, practical Feng Shui strategies for wealth. Using specific fruits strategically placed in your living space. This is not about rituals. This is not about superstition. This is about understanding how energy flows through your home and learning how to shape that flow intentionally using natural symbols of abundance. Fruits are not just food. In Feng Shui, they are living, breathing representations of growth, multiplication, and prosperity. Their colors, shapes, and even their scent send energetic messages that either invite wealth or silently block it. The best part? You don't need to turn your home upside down. You don't need expensive tools or complicated changes. All you need is awareness, a little strategy, and a handful of the right fruits placed in the right locations. Done correctly, these simple moves can quietly shift your environment from a place that holds you back into a space that pulls success toward you. Before we dive deeper, can I ask you for a quick favor? If you find value in practical Feng Shui knowledge that you can actually use, please take just a second to like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. Your support helps me get closer to reaching our first 1,000 subscribers, and it allows me to keep bringing more grounded, powerful teachings straight to you. All right, are you ready to turn your home into a magnet for wealth and opportunities, using nothing more complicated than the fruits you choose? Let's jump straight into it. Why fruits matter for wealth. In the practice of Feng Shui, the environment is not viewed as passive. Every object, color, and placement within a space actively interacts with the flow of qi, the vital life energy that determines the overall quality of life experienced by the occupants. Fruits hold a particularly potent position within this framework because they embody some of the most sought-after energies in Feng Shui: growth, multiplication, vitality, and fulfillment. They are not merely sustenance for the body, but nourishment for the energetic landscape of the home. Their very nature, colorful, full, rounded, sweet, vibrant, makes them natural attractors and amplifiers of abundance when consciously integrated into the living environment. In Feng Shui theory, living objects that represent continuous growth are favored over static, lifeless forms because they support dynamic qi flow. Fruits, being organic, ever-changing as they ripen, are symbols of the life force in action. They hold a silent narrative of development, transformation, and maturity, which are precisely the energetic qualities needed to attract sustainable financial success. When you place fruit strategically within your home, you are inviting qi to mirror the qualities represented by those fruits: expansion, abundance, richness, and fullness. Spaces that display fresh, vibrant fruits tend to have a feeling of vitality, optimism, and readiness for opportunity. In contrast, homes that lack living symbols or that display artificial, plastic, or decaying representations of life tend to feel stagnant, empty, and energetically disconnected from growth. Feng Shui recognizes that the human mind and the environment exist in constant feedback loops. When you fill your environment with symbols of richness and expansion, your subconscious mind adapts, shifting your actions, choices, and perceptions toward behaviors that naturally attract wealth and success. Specifically, fruits resonate strongly with the wood and earth elements in Feng Shui, two of the 5 fundamental building blocks that create the energetic architecture of the universe. The wood element governs growth, vitality, creativity, and upward movement. It represents beginnings, ambition, and natural expansion. The very energies needed to start new ventures, attract fresh opportunities, and maintain momentum in personal and professional life. Fruits, with their natural progression from seed to blossom to ripe harvest, are physical embodiments of the wood principle at work. They remind both the conscious and unconscious mind that growth is natural, expected, and achievable. At the same time, fruits also connect deeply to the earth element, which governs stability, nourishment, groundedness, and sustained material well-being. Wealth that grows without a strong foundation tends to collapse under pressure. The earth element ensures that financial success is not only achieved but stabilized and maintained. Fruits, especially those that are round and full-bodied, like apples, oranges, and pomegranates, embody the earth element's energy of completion and satisfaction. They signal that abundance is not a fleeting occurrence, but a natural, continual part of life when rooted in strong, stable practices. Understanding the energetic symbolism of fruits in this way, it allows for more strategic use in wealth-building Feng Shui. This location where fruits are placed matters greatly. Key wealth areas in the home, such as the southeast corner, traditionally associated with prosperity, the dining room, symbolizing family wealth, and the main entrance, where qi enters and sets the tone for the household, are prime locations for displaying fresh fruits. By placing living symbols of abundance in these critical qi nodes, you reinforce the message that your home is a space of ongoing growth, receptivity to opportunity, and financial well-being. Moreover, the quality and freshness of the fruits carries significant energetic weight. In Feng Shui, qi is responsive to vibrancy. Fruits that are bright in color, fresh, aromatic, and visually appealing generate strong, attractive qi fields. Conversely, spoiled, wilted, or artificially displayed fruits generate stagnant or even decaying energy. This is not merely symbolic. The physical decay of natural objects in a space can energetically anchor decline, fatigue, and scarcity in subtle but powerful ways. Thus, maintaining the freshness of fruits, rotating them regularly, displaying them with care, and removing any that begin to wither is essential to maintaining a clean, prosperous energy flow. Different fruits carry slightly different energetic qualities based on their appearance, traditional associations, and elemental resonance. Oranges, with their vivid color and uplifting scent, infuse a space with dynamic, active qi, ideal for catalyzing new opportunities and clearing financial blockages. Pomegranates, with their many seeds, symbolize multiplication of wealth and abundance in relationships, making them ideal for entrepreneurs and family-based businesses. Apples project calm, stable prosperity and are particularly effective for stabilizing the energy in communal living areas. Pineapples carry luck-forward energy, ideal for enhancing career transitions and attracting fortuitous timing in financial matters. Grapes promote steady, continuous financial inflows, supporting long-term savings, investments, and passive income streams. Peaches protect existing wealth while supporting vitality and long-term health, critical for sustaining active financial management. Bananas symbolize unity and collective prosperity, enhancing teamwork and community-based projects. Mangoes stabilize emotional responses to wealth, fostering wise stewardship and long-term planning rather than impulsive or fear-driven financial decisions. When using fruits for wealth enhancement, quantity and arrangement must also be considered. In Feng Shui, odd numbers generally promote movement and expansion. Arrangements of 3, 5, or 9 fruits are especially auspicious when placed on dining tables, in wealth corners, or near main entrances. These numbers create subtle energetic vibrations that encourage dynamic qi flow rather than stagnation. Furthermore, arranging fruits harmoniously, with attention to color balance and visual appeal, strengthens the cohesive, uplifting message to both the conscious mind and the energy field of the home. One of the most underestimated but critical aspects of fruit Feng Shui is the power of conscious intention. While Feng Shui is not about magical thinking, the act of choosing, placing, and maintaining fruits with clear awareness anchors the desired energy more deeply into the space. Intention focuses the qi. When you place a bowl of vibrant oranges near your front door, not out of habit but with the clear thought, I welcome new opportunities and financial growth into my life, you are not merely decorating, you are actively shaping the energetic blueprint of your future. This principle has been observed time and again across cultures and centuries. Environments prepared with clarity and positivity tend to attract aligned outcomes more readily than those maintained with randomness or neglect. Your home, as an extension of your own energy body, responds to the cues you embed within it. Fruits, because of their living, growing, and multiplying nature, act as powerful amplifiers of these embedded cues. If you program your space with symbols of abundance, freshness, and prosperity, over time, the energy field of your life shifts to match these symbols, drawing similar vibrations into your experiences. In conclusion, fruits matter in Feng Shui not because of superstition, but because they are tangible, dynamic representations of life's most fundamental processes: growth, multiplication, ripening, and enjoyment of bounty. They connect the abstract principles of the wood and earth elements to the concrete physical world. They enhance key chi flows in the home that govern financial prosperity and opportunity expansion. They serve as visual and energetic reminders of nature's abundant tendencies. And when aligned properly, they allow your environment to silently but powerfully work with you rather than against you in building the wealth and success you desire. The best fruits for wealth activation. Selecting the right fruits for wealth activation in Feng Shui is not merely a matter of taste or decoration. It is an intentional act of design based on the energetic qualities each fruit brings into a space. Each fruit, through its color, shape, internal structure, and traditional associations, interacts uniquely with the chi of an environment, amplifying different aspects of prosperity, opportunity, and stability. When chosen and placed wisely, these fruits act as living agents that reinforce abundance, dynamic growth, and long-term wealth retention. Oranges are among the most celebrated fruits in Feng Shui for energizing stagnant spaces and igniting movement where energy has become heavy or blocked. The vibrant, saturated orange color connects to the fire element, promoting action, visibility, and momentum. The natural scent of fresh oranges uplifts the atmosphere, triggering subtle shifts in the mental and emotional states of those living in the space. A bowl of oranges near the entrance invites fresh opportunities to cross the threshold. In business spaces, strategically placing oranges in meeting rooms or near transaction areas stimulates faster deal closures and livelier client interactions. The important key with oranges is their condition. They must be fresh, smooth, and visually radiant. Withered, shriveled oranges can have the opposite effect, signaling decline instead of movement. Pomegranates represent the powerful principle of multiplication, one of the most desired energetic signatures for financial expansion. Each pomegranate contains hundreds of seeds, each symbolizing a potential new opportunity, resource, or stream of income. In traditional Feng Shui, pomegranates are often placed in family areas or wealth corners to stimulate growth not only of wealth, but also of supportive relationships that sustain long-term prosperity. Entrepreneurs and investors benefit especially from the pomegranate's vibration, as it promotes the unfolding of multiple projects and financial sources simultaneously. A pomegranate displayed in the living room or near a workspace subtly programs the environment for fruitful expansion, helping the occupants recognize and act on multiple avenues for wealth creation. Apples, with their firm, round shape and soothing colors, are essential stabilizers in Feng Shui wealth design. Red apples, particularly, carry fire energy, supporting strength and leadership, while green apples lean toward wood energy, encouraging fresh growth and vitality. Apples symbolize peace, harmony, and trustworthy relationships, crucial elements in any sustainable wealth-building strategy. In personal wealth, Feng Shui, apples strengthen trust networks, friendships, partnerships, client relations, which are often the unseen pillars supporting visible financial success. A bowl of red and green apples placed in the dining room where family and guests gather fosters not just financial stability, but relational stability, multiplying the subtle goodwill that naturally attracts opportunity. Pineapples are energetic beacons of rising luck and career breakthroughs. Their golden color, spiky crown, and sweet fragrance combine fire and earth energies in a unique way, promoting both sudden elevation and stable grounding. In Feng Shui, pineapples are often associated with incoming fortune because their visual form seems to crown upward while the fruit itself is richly abundant. Placing a pineapple near the front door signals to the universe that the household is prepared to receive blessings and positive surprises. In professional spaces, a small pineapple decor on a desk or near a career advancement corner, north sector, can magnetize promotional opportunities. unexpected alliances, and breakthroughs that previously seemed distant. Grapes have long been revered as symbols of abundance, continuity, and joyful prosperity. Their clustered form represents unity, while each individual grape signifies a consistent stream of wealth. In Feng Shui, grapes are ideal for enhancing passive income streams, such as investments, royalties, or business revenue that flows without direct daily labor. Displaying grape imagery or fresh grape clusters in wealth areas encourages steady, ongoing financial growth rather than boom and bust cycles. Grapes also enhance social energy, making them ideal for those whose prosperity depends on strong networks, community support, or client bases. A simple but potent placement is a cluster of green grapes in the southeast wealth corner of the home, refreshing the area every few days to keep the chai dynamic and alive. Persimmons carry the gentle but powerful energy of patience, maturity, and the slow, steady accumulation of wealth over time. In Feng Shui, persimmons are often associated with peaceful prosperity, growth that is stable, unhurried, and enduring. Their warm orange color connects lightly to the fire element, while their heavy, solid form connects to earth, creating a natural balance ideal for wealth strategies that prioritize long-term investment and slow, compounding returns. For individuals building retirement savings, growing family businesses, or cultivating financial legacies, persimmons offer perfect energetic support. A painting or depiction of ripe persimmons in an office or wealth corner serves as a quiet but constant reminder that true prosperity ripens with patience and wise cultivation. Peaches hold a revered place in Feng Shui as powerful protectors of fortune and vitality. Traditionally, peaches are symbols of longevity and resilience, two qualities that are critical for maintaining wealth over decades. Financial prosperity without health or emotional balance is often fleeting. Peaches reinforce the vital qi needed to sustain ambition, decision-making clarity, and personal joy throughout the wealth journey. Displaying peaches near the bedroom supports restorative energy, while placing them near entrances ensures that misfortune or draining influences are kept at bay before they can penetrate deeper into the household's energy structure. Their soft, nurturing vibration makes them especially useful in homes where financial growth must be balanced with personal healing or recovery. Bananas symbolize unity, collective strength, and the energy of growing together toward prosperity. Their naturally upward, slightly cupped shape mirrors the gesture of welcoming and receiving blessings. In Feng Shui, bananas are ideal for households or businesses where teamwork, cooperation, and collective advancement are essential. For business owners, displaying bananas in the work environment supports team cohesion and shared success, amplifying not just individual but group wealth. In family settings, bananas reinforce the idea that prosperity multiplies when generations support each other, perfect for families focused on building multi-generational wealth or preserving family businesses. Mangoes offer a more subtle but profoundly stabilizing influence in the wealth matrix of Feng Shui. Their plump, golden bodies and soft fragrance resonate with earth energy, grounding emotional responses to money and helping individuals manage resources calmly and wisely. Mangoes are especially useful for those prone to financial anxiety, impulsive spending, or scarcity mentalities. By stabilizing the emotional chai around wealth, mangoes create conditions where logical, strategic financial decisions become easier, reducing self-sabotage and supporting sustainable wealth expansion. A mango placed near the workspace or where financial documents are handled reinforces emotional steadiness, clarity, and a grounded approach to money matters. The strategic use of these fruits is not about creating elaborate displays or treating them as charms. It is about understanding the energetic conversations they initiate within your space. Each fruit, chosen thoughtfully and placed with purpose, becomes a living participant in your wealth journey, amplifying the energy you need most at each stage. Whether you need the dynamic spark of oranges to break stagnation, the steady flow of grapes to support ongoing income, or the stabilizing wisdom of persimmons to cultivate patient investments, your environment can be silently, powerfully tuned to mirror your financial goals. Story: the true power of Feng Shui is most vividly demonstrated not in theory but in real-life transformations, where subtle shifts in environment produce tangible shifts in fortune. One particularly striking example involves a real estate agent based in a highly competitive urban market whose personal experience with fruit-based Feng Shui provides a vivid case study of how even the smallest energetic realignments can lead to outsized results. At the time she encountered Feng Shui practices, her career was stalled. She was hardworking, talented, and well-connected, yet for 6 months she struggled to close new deals. Despite countless networking events, marketing pushes, and client meetings, the momentum simply was not there. Prospective buyers seemed hesitant. Promising contracts inexplicably fell through at the last minute. The energy around her business felt heavy, stuck, and resistant. Upon reflection and consultation with a Feng Shui advisor, she realized that the main entrance to her home, symbolically the mouth through which qi flows into her personal life, was energetically barren. There were no living symbols of vibrancy or abundance to greet the energy entering her space. Instead, the area was dominated by cold, hard surfaces and neutral, static decor. It was visually clean but energetically sterile, offering no invitation to movement, growth, or prosperity. Following traditional Feng Shui principles tailored to her situation, she decided to implement a very simple, practical adjustment. She placed a large, polished wooden bowl near her front door, filling it with fresh, vibrant oranges and green grapes. The oranges, with their dynamic color and uplifting scent, were intended to spark movement and attract new opportunities, clearing the stagnation that had accumulated. The green grapes, symbolizing continuity and abundance, were intended to support a steady, ongoing flow of income, replacing the erratic, unpredictable deal pattern she had been experiencing. She made a commitment to maintain the display meticulously. The fruits were replaced every few days to ensure freshness and vibrancy. Every morning as she left her home, she consciously acknowledged the fruit arrangement, reinforcing mentally the intention that new opportunities and continuous growth were welcome in her life and business. She did not perform elaborate rituals, nor did she treat the practice as a superstition. Instead, she understood it as creating an environment that supported her psychological state and energetic openness to success. Within a few weeks, subtle but unmistakable changes began to occur. Client inquiries increased, seemingly without additional marketing efforts. Prospective buyers who had previously been hesitant began to move forward with decisions. Referrals from past clients started trickling in more steadily. Within 2 months, her sales volume had doubled compared to the previous quarter, and she reported feeling a renewed sense of personal motivation and professional magnetism that had been missing for much of the year. Her story illustrates a key principle in practical Feng Shui. When the environment is adjusted to support abundance, both internal mindsets and external circumstances often shift in alignment, producing visible, measurable results without force or struggle. Another equally powerful example comes from a small boutique cafe owner who was facing a make-or-break period for her business. Located in a charming but low-traffic area, her cafe suffered from inconsistent footfall, with daily revenue fluctuating unpredictably. Despite her best efforts with marketing, loyalty programs, and community outreach, the numbers remained stubbornly flat, threatening the long-term viability of her dream. After studying basic Feng Shui principles, she realized that her point-of-sale area, the energetic exchange point where services turned into income, was energetically weak. The counter space was cluttered with functional but uninspiring objects, receipt printers, sanitizer bottles, marketing flyers. There was no energetic invitation to abundance, no visual reinforcement of growth or prosperity at the moment of transaction. Drawing on classic Feng Shui wisdom, she decided to introduce symbols of wealth and good fortune directly into the sales area. She placed a small but elegant arrangement of pomegranates and pineapples next to the register. The pomegranates, with their symbolism of multiplying seeds and wealth opportunities, were intended to encourage customer loyalty and repeat business. The pineapples, known for signaling incoming luck and good news, were intended to attract positive energy at the critical point of monetary exchange. As with the real estate agent, she approached the practice with practical intention rather than mystical belief. She kept the fruit displays fresh and aesthetically pleasing, cleaned the area daily, and mentally affirmed gratitude for every sale, no matter how small. Over the course of 3 months, she noticed a significant shift. Regular customers began to visit more frequently. Positive online reviews increased, bringing in new patrons who remarked on the cafe's welcoming atmosphere. Private event bookings, previously rare, became a steady new revenue stream. Her average daily income increased by 30% within a quarter, allowing her not only to stabilize her operations, but also to start planning for a second location. Both stories demonstrate that Feng Shui, when practiced correctly, is less about superstition and more about environmental alignment. The strategic use of fruits, living symbols of abundance, vibrancy, and growth, created subtle energetic cues that resonated both with the individual's subconscious minds and the external opportunities available to them. These cues supported shifts in behavior, perception, and interaction, magnifying results without requiring major changes to effort or strategy. It is crucial to note that in both examples, success did not stem from placing fruits and passively waiting for miracles. Success emerged from a combination of external environmental shifts and internal mindset recalibrations. The fruits served as catalysts, not crutches. They reinforced the intention of openness to growth, the readiness to receive abundance, and the awareness of opportunities that might otherwise have been overlooked or undervalued. These real-world cases also underscore the importance of maintenance and mindfulness. In Feng Shui, energy must be actively nurtured. Fresh fruits maintained with care create a dynamic energy field. Neglected, spoiled, or artificial displays create stagnation. The commitment to sustaining the vitality of the fruit displays mirrored the commitment to sustaining the vibrancy of the business and personal efforts, creating a positive feedback loop between environment, action, and outcome. Furthermore, these examples reflect the power of simplicity in Feng Shui application. No complex remodeling projects, expensive artifacts, or esoteric rituals were necessary. Small, thoughtful interventions, guided by ancient principles of energetic design, produce disproportionately powerful results. This accessibility makes fruit-based Feng Shui one of the most practical, immediate, and effective wealth enhancement strategies available to anyone willing to engage with their environment intentionally. Ultimately, these stories serve as a living reminder that prosperity is not just the result of effort alone. It is the natural consequence of aligning your internal state, your external actions, and your surrounding environment toward a shared goal. When the home, the mind, and the heart are all programmed for abundance, success becomes not a distant aspiration, but a natural extension of daily life. The humble bowl of fruits, thoughtfully chosen and strategically placed, becomes far more than a centerpiece. It becomes a silent, steadfast ally on the path to financial freedom and enduring prosperity. How to maximize fruit energy. In Feng Shui, the placement of objects within a space is not accidental. Every item interacts with the qi flow of the environment, either reinforcing harmonious movement or introducing stagnation and disruption. Fruits, as potent living symbols of abundance, vitality, and multiplication, must be placed with deliberate strategy if they are to maximize their energetic impact. Simply bringing fruits into a home without attention to where and how they are displayed dilutes their effectiveness, turning what could be a wealth-enhancing tool into a neutral or even counterproductive feature. Strategic placement begins with understanding the key energetic zones of the home, especially those traditionally associated with financial prosperity, opportunity flow, and overall abundance. The main entrance, the dining room, and the southeast corner of the house are particularly powerful areas for fruit activation because they represent the gateways and reservoirs of wealth energy within the Feng Shui map. The main entrance, often called the mouth of qi, is where energy enters and sets the tone for everything that follows inside the home. When fresh, vibrant fruits are placed near the entrance, ideally on a console table, a small welcoming shelf, or even a side table visible upon entry, they immediately broadcast a message of vitality, readiness, and abundance to all incoming qi. This placement not only affects the energetic quality of the home, but also subtly influences the mindset of the residents and guests, setting a psychological expectation of prosperity and growth. The fruits should be positioned where they can be seen easily but not obstruct the natural flow of movement, ensuring that their energetic message enhances rather than blocks the qi flow. The dining room holds profound significance in Feng Shui because it symbolizes the gathering and sharing of wealth. Historically, a well-stocked dining table represented security, prosperity, and communal flourishing. In modern applications, keeping a bowl of fresh, abundant fruits at the center of the dining table anchors the idea that wealth is not a fleeting event, but an ongoing, shared experience. This symbolic reinforcement strengthens both the subconscious beliefs around abundance and the actual energetic field within the home. Importantly, the fruit arrangement should be the visual centerpiece, clear of clutter or competing objects, allowing its energy to dominate the space with clarity and positivity. The southeast corner of the home or main living space corresponds to the wealth and prosperity sector in classical Feng Shui Bagua mapping. Enhancing this corner with fruits rich in symbolism, such as pomegranates for multiplying assets, grapes for continuous income, or persimmons for patient growth, amplifies the natural energetic potential of this area. Care should be taken to ensure that the southeast zone is clean, well-lit, and energetically open before placing the fruits. Dark, cluttered, or forgotten corners diminish the effectiveness of even the most potent symbols. Where possible, fruits placed here should be paired with other prosperity-enhancing elements, such as plants, representing ongoing growth, or flowing water features, representing wealth movement, creating a layered energetic ecosystem that supports robust financial flourishing. Equally critical as location is the condition of the fruits themselves. In Feng Shui, qi is extremely sensitive to vibrancy. Fresh, colorful, aromatic fruits radiate positive, attractive energy. Wilted, spoiled, or dust-covered fruits, by contrast, symbolize decay, stagnation, and lost opportunities. A single rotting apple left unattended on a wealth altar can, energetically speaking, cancel out the positive intentions behind an otherwise carefully crafted Feng Shui design. Thus, maintenance is not a trivial concern, but a vital part of energetic hygiene. Fruits should be inspected daily, with any showing signs of decay immediately removed and replaced. Regular rotation of fruits, even when they still appear good, keeps the qi lively and prevents the buildup of stagnant energy patterns that subtly erode prosperity consciousness over time. Another key principle in fruit placement is the use of odd numbers, particularly the numbers 3, 5, and 9. In Feng Shui numerology, odd numbers are considered yang, active, dynamic, and growth-oriented, whereas even numbers are yin, stable, passive, and conserving. Using 3 fruits emphasizes beginnings, creativity, and momentum, ideal for entrepreneurs, new projects, or financial resets. 5 fruits symbolize balanced abundance, integrating all 5 elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, water, into a cohesive energetic field. 9 fruits, a number of completion and magnified power, represent reaching a peak of success and then multiplying it. The choice of number should match the current goals and energetic needs of the household or business, allowing the fruit arrangement to become a living reflection of desired outcomes. The arrangement of fruits within the display also requires strategic thought. The display should appear full but not crowded, vibrant but not chaotic. Colors should be harmoniously coordinated to support a feeling of richness and coherence. For example, a mix of red apples, golden oranges, and green grapes creates a visual tapestry that stimulates the eye and nourishes the mind's perception of abundance. Symmetry can be used to anchor stability, while asymmetry, when done with artistic balance, can stimulate creative flow and dynamic growth. The container or bowl itself should be attractive, sturdy, and clean, ideally made from natural materials like wood, ceramic, or metal that align with the 5-element correspondences of the space. One critical mistake that undermines fruit feng shui is random, careless placement. Throwing a bowl of fruit onto a side table without considering its relationship to space, flow, or intention is energetically meaningless or even disruptive. Every placement must have a purpose aligned with the energetic map of the environment. For instance, placing fruits near a bathroom, an area associated with energy drainage, can symbolically and energetically siphon off the abundance the fruits are meant to attract. Similarly, placing fruits directly across from a mirror may energetically double the wealth symbolism. A useful strategy if the mirror reflects a dining table laden with fruits but a harmful one if the reflection captures clutter, a trash bin, or an untidy kitchen. Spatial awareness and strategic alignment amplify the fruit's chi-enhancing power, whereas careless positioning reduces or reverses their intended effect. Additionally, the environmental context surrounding the fruits matters greatly. A beautiful bowl of fruits sitting in an otherwise chaotic, dusty, or dark corner cannot work miracles. The surrounding space must be energetically coherent, clean, ordered, well-lit, and preferably infused with other subtle positive cues like healthy plants, tasteful art, or flowing air. The fruits should not have to fight against a negative energetic background. They should harmonize with a field of overall positivity, enhancing it exponentially. For individuals deeply committed to maximizing fruit energy activation, it is also advisable to align the fruit placement with seasonal cycles. In spring, emphasizing green and fresh fruits like green apples and grapes supports the wood energy of renewal. In summer, fiery fruits like oranges and peaches magnify the fire energy of expansion and visibility. In autumn, grounding fruits like persimmons and pomegranates reinforce the earth energy of harvest and stability. In winter, deep, nourishing fruits like bananas and mangoes support introspection and financial conservation. Seasonal alignment not only enhances environmental chi, but also synchronizes the household's energy field with natural cosmic rhythms, creating greater coherence and amplifying the speed and ease with which abundance flows. Ultimately, maximizing fruit energy through strategic placement in Feng Shui is a practice of conscious environmental design. It requires not only the selection of appropriate fruits, but also their intentional integration into the energetic architecture of the living space. By paying attention to location, freshness, number, arrangement, maintenance, and surrounding context, individuals can transform a simple bowl of fruits into a powerful magnet for wealth, success, and sustained prosperity. When approached with awareness, consistency, and clarity of purpose, this practice becomes not merely decorative but transformative, turning the home itself into an active participant in the financial flourishing of its occupants. Common mistakes to avoid. While integrating fruits into a Feng Shui wealth strategy is a powerful method for activating prosperity energy, it is equally important to understand that the benefits of such practices can be easily undermined by common mistakes. Missteps in the selection, placement, or maintenance of fruits can not only neutralize the positive chi intended, but also create subtle energetic blockages that stagnate wealth flow, diminish opportunity, and even reverse progress over time. Understanding these pitfalls is crucial for anyone serious about maintaining an environment that actively supports financial and personal growth. One of the most widespread and damaging mistakes is the use of fake fruits in place of fresh, living ones. While artificial fruits may appear convenient due to their low maintenance, they do not possess the dynamic, vibrant qi that real fruits naturally radiate. In Feng Shui, qi responds to life force. Living objects, plants, fresh flowers, fresh fruits, carry a bioenergetic field that interacts positively with the energy of a space. Artificial fruits, no matter how realistic they appear, lack this life force. Instead, they introduce a form of stagnant, inert energy that over time can contribute to feelings of inertia, lack of motivation, and diminished financial movement. Moreover, fake fruits tend to accumulate dust and environmental residue, further compounding their negative impact by physically and energetically anchoring decay rather than vitality. Even well-meaning attempts to use high-quality silk or resin fruits cannot replicate the subtle energetic vibration of nature's living abundance. Therefore, while it may require more care and regular maintenance, using real fresh fruits is non-negotiable for effective Feng Shui wealth enhancement. Equally harmful is the failure to maintain the freshness and cleanliness of fruit displays. Even fresh fruits, if allowed to wither, rot, or gather dust, quickly become negative qi anchors. A single neglected apple, moldy orange, or shriveled grape in a wealth corner can energetically communicate the presence of decline, neglect, and decay to both the environment and the subconscious minds of the inhabitants. This silent messaging undermines efforts to cultivate abundance, subtly aligning the energy field with stagnation rather than growth. In energetic terms, neglect breeds neglect. If the prosperity altar itself is unattended, the larger chai field begins to reflect that disconnection. Therefore, fruit displays must be treated as living altars to abundance, deserving daily attention, replenishment, and reverence, not casual or sporadic care. Another critical misplacement error is situating fruit displays in areas of the home considered energetic sinks, such as bathrooms, garages, or cluttered utility spaces. In Feng Shui, bathrooms represent spaces where energy naturally drains away, following the downward flow of water and waste. Placing symbols of wealth, growth, or prosperity in or near these zones energetically aligns the intended abundance with drainage and loss, counteracting any positive effects. Similarly, garages, often transitional, neglected, or chaotic spaces, tend to have fragmented, unsettled chai, unsuitable for wealth cultivation. Fruits placed in these areas may inadvertently anchor instability, missed opportunities, or financial leakage. The guiding principle is clear. Fruits must be displayed in active, lived-in spaces where qi can interact robustly with daily life, not in dead zones or transitional areas where energy dissipates or stagnates. Beyond location, the way fruits are arranged also plays a decisive role in their energetic effectiveness. Overloading a space with too many fruits, piled haphazardly without visual or spatial balance, creates an impression of chaos rather than abundance. In Feng Shui, abundance is not synonymous with clutter. True abundance feels expansive, orderly, and intentional. An overloaded fruit display overwhelms the senses, introduces scattered qi patterns, and can subconsciously trigger feelings of overwhelm, lack of focus, and financial confusion. Instead of creating a clear, vibrant wealth magnet, such displays muddy the energetic signals being sent into the environment, reducing coherence and diluting manifestation potential. The goal is always harmony, not excess. Displays should feel full but not crowded, vibrant but not chaotic, inviting but not overwhelming. A related mistake is ignoring proportionality between the fruit display and the scale of the surrounding environment. A small, modest display may be sufficient and elegant in a compact dining area, but may seem insignificant and energetically weak in a grand, open-concept living space. Conversely, an oversized, elaborate display crammed into a small corner may feel oppressive and energetically jarring. Just as furniture in Feng Shui must be scaled appropriately to room dimensions to support balanced energy flow, so too must wealth-enhancing elements like fruit displays be scaled to match their spatial context. This ensures that the qi generated by the fruits integrates harmoniously with the broader energy currents of the home, amplifying rather than distorting their intended effects. Another easily overlooked error is the failure to align the types of fruits selected with the current energetic needs and personal goals of the household. Different fruits embody different energetic signatures: dynamic movement, steady growth, protective stability, communal support. Placing fruits indiscriminately without regard to these qualities creates a random, incoherent energy field rather than a targeted, purposeful one. For example, a household seeking to stabilize long-term savings and investments may benefit most from the steadying influence of persimmons and grapes, while a business owner seeking rapid expansion may benefit more from the activating presence of oranges and pineapples. Mindful selection ensures that the energetic blueprint of the space matches and supports the life blueprint of its inhabitants, reinforcing success from multiple dimensions. Another subtle but powerful mistake is allowing the fruit display to become purely decorative, devoid of ongoing conscious engagement. In Feng Shui, intention matters as much as action. Energetic objects work best when they are engaged with regularly, even briefly. Simply setting up a beautiful fruit arrangement and then mentally tuning it out reduces its active influence over time. Instead, residents should consciously interact with the display, appreciating its beauty, mentally affirming abundance when seeing it, refreshing it with care and gratitude. This active relationship with the wealth altar keeps the qi vibrant, dynamic, and responsive, preventing energetic stagnation and deepening the integration of abundance consciousness into daily life. Finally, one of the gravest mistakes is viewing the fruit placement as a passive fix-all or magical solution to financial challenges. Feng Shui is a system of environmental support, not a substitute for personal effort, wise decision-making, or strategic action. Fruits placed skillfully amplify existing momentum. They cannot generate success in an environment of total inactivity, mismanagement, or negativity. They are allies, not crutches. When used correctly, they enhance clarity, motivation, openness to opportunity, and positive flow. But they require the foundation of aligned human action to fully manifest their potential benefits. In summary, maximizing the power of fruit. Feng Shui requires vigilance against common errors, rejecting artificial or decaying substitutes, avoiding placement in energy-draining areas, maintaining visual and spatial harmony, aligning fruit selection with life goals, engaging consciously with the displays, and understanding that environmental support must be paired with personal responsibility. By steering clear of these pitfalls, individuals transform a simple act of decorating into a profound act of energetic mastery, shaping not just the aesthetics of their homes, but the trajectories of their lives toward greater prosperity, fulfillment, and joy. Simple 3-step setup for wealth fruit. Feng Shui. Turning the principles of wealth fruit Feng Shui into real-world results does not require complex rituals or overwhelming redesigns. It requires clarity, simplicity, and most importantly, consistent action. By following a focused, easy-to-implement 3-step plan, anyone can begin transforming their home into a dynamic space that continuously supports financial growth, opportunity expansion, and overall energetic well-being. Each step, while straightforward, carries layered importance and should be executed with both practical care and deliberate consciousness. The first and foundational step is to carefully select 3 to 5 types of fruits from the wealth-activating list that resonate most strongly with you personally. This step is not about random choice or mechanical following of a list. It is about creating a conscious, energetic alignment between the symbolic properties of the fruits and the specific financial, career, and personal growth goals you wish to support. For example, if your current priority is to increase your daily cash flow and attract more immediate opportunities, choosing oranges for dynamic movement and pineapples for incoming luck would be highly strategic. If, on the other hand, your focus is on stabilizing existing wealth and ensuring long-term financial security, persimmons and grapes would offer more aligned energetic support. Emotional resonance matters because when you feel a genuine connection to the symbols you use, your subconscious mind absorbs and amplifies the energetic cues they provide, making your intentions stronger and more effortlessly integrated into your environment. Therefore, spend a few minutes reflecting on your current financial goals, career aspirations, or wealth challenges. Then choose fruits whose traditional Feng Shui meanings align naturally with the energies you wish to cultivate and strengthen. Selecting 3 to 5 fruits ensures both variety and focus, enough diversity to cover multiple dimensions of prosperity, but not so many that the display becomes energetically diluted or chaotic. The second step is to place the selected fruits consciously in 2 to 3 strategic spots within your home that are energetically significant for wealth generation, according to Feng Shui principles. The entrance, the dining table, and the wealth corner, typically the southeast sector of the living space, are the 3 most potent locations for fruit placement. Placing fruits at the entrance ensures that new, vibrant qi enters the home already programmed for abundance, signaling openness to opportunity and financial expansion. The entrance sets the energetic tone for everything that follows, and a welcoming display of vibrant fruits immediately broadcasts the message that prosperity is present, desired, and expected within the household. The dining table, traditionally associated with family wealth, shared prosperity, and daily abundance, is another key node for reinforcing financial growth. Fruits placed here remind all household members, whether consciously or subliminally, that abundance is a daily reality, nourishing both body and spirit. Finally, the southeast corner, aligned with the wealth sector on the Bagua map, serves as the energetic anchor for material success. A carefully curated fruit display here acts as a living altar to prosperity, continuously reinforcing the flow of opportunities, investments, savings, and financial achievements. Placement should never be rushed or careless. When setting the fruits in these areas, take a brief moment to connect mentally with the action. Recognize that you are not just decorating but configuring the energetic blueprint of your life. Arrange the fruits attractively, ensuring they look full but not cluttered, vibrant but not overwhelming. Use bowls, plates, or stands made of natural materials whenever possible, wood, ceramic, or metal, to harmonize with the elemental energies of the space. Pay attention to symmetry, flow, and color balance, aiming to create displays that not only energize wealth chi, but also uplift your personal mood and visual experience every time you encounter them. The third and equally vital step is the consistent weekly replacement of the fruits to maintain a living, vibrant chai field. Energy, like nature, thrives on freshness, movement, and life. Allowing fruits to rot, shrivel, or become stale undermines the very wealth energy you seek to enhance. In Feng Shui, decaying or neglected objects in prosperity zones communicate messages of financial stagnation, missed opportunities, and declining fortune. Therefore, it is essential to adopt a simple but non-negotiable routine. Every week, without exception, refresh your fruit displays. Remove all existing fruits, even those that still appear physically intact but may have lost their vibrancy. Clean the bowls or stands thoroughly, clearing any dust or energetic residue. Then restock with new, fresh fruits, ideally following seasonal cycles to keep the energy harmonized with nature's rhythms. This regular act of maintenance does more than keep the space beautiful. It sends a strong, clear message to your environment and your subconscious mind that abundance is a living, breathing part of your daily reality, worthy of care, attention, and gratitude. Consistency in this final step is what transforms a symbolic gesture into an embedded life habit. Over time, as the weekly ritual becomes second nature, the cumulative energetic impact builds powerfully. Your home becomes a living organism aligned with growth, renewal, and opportunity. Opportunities that once seemed rare begin to appear more frequently. Financial stress diminishes. Confidence in handling resources strengthens. Importantly, these changes do not happen overnight, nor do they happen by magic. They are the natural consequence of reshaping your energetic environment in ways that continuously support, nourish, and expand your wealth consciousness. Another hidden benefit of this three-step setup is the positive influence it has on personal discipline and attention to detail, both crucial qualities for building and sustaining financial success. If you can consistently maintain small, energetic practices like fruit renewal, you are training yourself in the larger disciplines of wealth management. Attention, care, proactivity, and alignment between intentions and actions. In this sense, Fruit Feng Shui becomes a training ground for greater mastery over your financial destiny, cultivating not only external wealth, but also the internal habits that allow wealth to thrive sustainably. Moreover, the visible beauty and vibrancy of a well-maintained fruit display create emotional uplift, improving daily mood, reducing stress, and promoting a mindset more naturally receptive to positivity and opportunity. Feng Shui teaches that the outer environment and the inner emotional environment are inseparably linked. When you consistently expose yourself to living symbols of fullness, sweetness, and abundance, you reinforce these qualities internally, shaping thoughts, emotions, and choices that align with wealth creation across every dimension of life. In closing, the simple three-step action plan, choosing fruits that resonate with your goals, placing them with conscious intention in strategic wealth-enhancing locations, and maintaining their freshness weekly, offers a profound yet accessible gateway into the practical application of Feng Shui wealth principles. It requires no major financial investment, no drastic life changes, and no complex esoteric knowledge. What it does require is willingness. The willingness to take ownership of your environment, to act consistently on your intentions, and to recognize that prosperity begins not with dramatic external shifts, but with small, powerful choices made day after day, week after week. In the end, transforming your home into a magnet for wealth through fruit, Feng Shui is not about believing in luck. It is about building an ecosystem of energy where luck, opportunity, and prosperity feel invited, supported, and inevitable. Your home becomes not a passive container, but an active collaborator in your financial journey, a silent but steadfast ally encouraging your growth. your success, and your fulfillment at every step. And it all begins with a handful of fruits, a few minutes of attention, and a decision to shape your destiny consciously, beautifully, and abundantly. Final wealth does not simply appear. It does not arrive by chance, nor does it favor only the lucky or the relentless. True prosperity is quietly cultivated, patiently prepared, and consciously invited. It grows in environments that nourish its flow, environments that whisper to opportunity, "You are welcome here." Every day, whether we notice it or not, our homes either support or repel the energies of abundance. They either open wide the doors to financial growth or subtly close them through neglect, stagnation, or misalignment. There is no neutral ground. Energy is always moving, always responding. The question is, are you shaping that movement intentionally or allowing it to drift aimlessly? When you consciously place vibrant, living fruits into your home, when you choose symbols of growth, fullness, and sweetness, you are not just decorating. You are planting seeds in the unseen soil of your future prosperity. You are sending silent but powerful signals, not only to the universe but to your own heart and mind, that you are ready to receive, ready to grow, ready to rise. You are telling life itself, "I am a fertile field for abundance." The journey toward wealth is not made of grand, one-time gestures. It is made of small, steady acts of preparation, choosing wisely, placing intentionally, tending carefully. It is built every time you replace a bowl of fruits before they wither. Every time you clean the corner of your home that holds your wealth energy. Every time you look at your space and choose alignment over chaos, vitality over neglect. Your home speaks even when you do not. It speaks to the opportunities that pass by. It speaks to the invisible currents of fortune. It speaks to the parts of you that are always listening, your dreams, your hopes, your quiet courage. What story is your home telling today? What invitation is it sending? If today's reflections have opened even a small new window in your thinking, I invite you to take action. Start simple. Choose one fruit. Place it with care. Watch how even one small act of conscious design can shift the way your environment feels and the way your life begins to move. Which fruit will you place first in your home? I would truly love to hear. Please feel free to share your thoughts, your intentions, or your experiences in the comments below. Your story matters. It might even inspire someone else who is just beginning their journey toward a more abundant life. And if today's wisdom resonated with you, if you found even a little bit of insight or encouragement here, I warmly invite you to support this community by liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need a boost of positive energy, and subscribing to New Day Mindfulness. Your simple actions help this circle grow. Help this wisdom reach more homes, more hearts, more lives. And together we can continue bringing ancient truths into the modern world in ways that are practical, grounded, and deeply transformative. Thank you for sharing your time, your attention, and your spirit here today. May your home become a living garden of prosperity. May your days be filled with small, steady miracles. And may you always remember, abundance is not found, it is built, one mindful choice at a time.